Hi and welcome. My name's Julianne Cost, and in today's episode of The Complete Picture, we're actually going to talk about how you select images that work together and why images work together when you use them as either diptychs or triptychs, because there's actually quite a bit of thought that is involved. Now, I started creating diptychs to show my images on a website so that I could show two images next to each other. And there are really a lot of things to consider when doing this. So we're going to take a look at some of those things that we should consider. And then in the following episode, because this is a two-part episode, we're going to be actually taking a number of images, and I'm going to show you some things that you can do in Lightroom to make those images fit together better, like a sequence of images that you might either want to include all in one frame, or that you might want to frame and hang next to each other and kind of have the same style and look and feel. All right, so we'll begin here in Lightroom, and let's just go over to Slideshow. That's Option Command 3 or Alt Control 3. And then I'm going to play the slideshow, but the second I start playing it, I'm going to tap the space bar. This is just a little title slide. Then I'll tap the space bar, and that allows me to now manually move from one image to the next in Lightroom. So this image, the reason that I think that these two images work together is because of their color as well as the shape. And one of the things that you want to keep in mind is how your image moves around the scene, because now remember, these aren't two individual photographs, but by putting them together we've made them into kind of a single image. And so you really want to watch the way that your viewer's eye is going to move around the two images. So I think here it also really helps that they were both taken in the same place and that they have the same kind of subject matter, being that they were both photographed in China in the Forbidden City. Okay, in this next set of images, also photographed in China, we can see that the very, very simplistic shapes are helping to keep these two images or bind these two images together. The really solid background here of red and the very solid background here, as well as this nice leading line going up the man's arm and then up through the sticks of incense and then bringing you around to the other image. Here we've got some repeating patterns, and we've got a lot of bright colors. So we've got these sticks, and that pattern is repeated right over here in the bench. In this diptych, we have two photographs of the same object, right? They're both of the Golden Gate Bridge, but taken from very different perspectives. And again, this nice green goes very well with the orange, and we've got these leading lines going back and forth between the two images. Here I think really the color palette is what's keeping these images together, as well as the fact that you've got this nice thin line here repeated over here with this thin line. What else also helps with these is their selective focus. So these were both shot with a lens baby, so you can see that there's just a slight area here in focus, and that's repeated over here. So kind of the lack of area that's really sharp kind of really works because both of them have that. If one image was tack sharp and the other was very blurry, it would be more difficult and it would be harder to unify those into one diptych. These two images here, taken in completely different locations, brought together not only with a color palette, and I changed those colors in Lightroom, but also I like the repeating squares on the image on the right and how those squares are repeated on the left, even though there's a slight variance where the squares, each one of these little squares right here, happens to be made up of circles. In this diptych, obviously we've got this nice leading line here where this wall, this stone wall here, moves into the bench, but even more so is the fact that they're both shot with the infrared camera. So they kind of have the same glowing leaves and the same type of feel with this nice colored kind of yellow sky in the background here and the blue in the leaves. So that's holding those together as well. Here we've got some nice repeating patterns. I love the way that the arc of this circle takes you over into this image, which is then repeated down here. And you can see that it's missing, right? It's an incomplete circle, just as this one's incomplete. So think of shapes and repeating patterns in the images that you're going to pair together. Here, just very, very graphical shapes. And here I really like the way that the colors actually contrast, right? So we've got blue and we've got kind of this gold. If you don't know the color wheel, you can remember it like I do, which is Red Cars by GM. So red cars, that's red and cyan, by blue and yellow, GM is green and magenta. So now you'll always know what colors are opposite each other. So using the opposite colors here adds a little bit of contrast, but at the same time, the graphical nature of both images holds them together. Here, again, very, very graphical images in nature, similar subject matter. Again, very graphical, detailed shots, both close up, both showing kind of big circles and big graphical areas of color or shape or dark or light. That's going to help keep images together or make images look like they belong together. Of course, it helps that both of these were also photographed in the same location. Now here I think this is interesting because you've got two very different images, but the color palette's pulling them together, the selective focus is pulling them together, the direction of the birds walking over here into the clouds, which then sweeps you down into the other bright areas, right? Because we know that our eyes are always attracted to bright areas in the image, brings you down, and then their little footprints are going to bring you back to the birds, completing the full circle here. I think this is interesting. These are both very high frequency images, so there's a lot of detail in these images. Neither one of these images I don't think tells a story on their own, but when you put them together, obviously there's some relationship, or it's being implied that there's a relationship between the water and the footprint in the sand. Both also taken with a lens baby, so we've got that selective focus going on as well. Both very contrasty, right? So lots of detail, lots of contrast in the sand, and lots of contrast in the ocean. So similar looking and feeling images being held together there. Here again, we've got the steps that show the relationship going up to the statue of Abraham Lincoln in DC. Same color palette is holding them together. The same blues down here going into the oranges up at the top. Now these, you've noticed there's a very different crop on these. I love the balance between these, where the weight of this image is in the lower left, the weight of this image is in the upper right. I also like the kind of juxtaposition where this looks very open and inviting and expansive. It looks like you could go there, whereas this image on the right is doing the exact opposite, right? It holds you back. It's not allowing you to go onto the other side of that glass. So it's not that images always have to be similar. A lot of times you can play with opposites and put them next to each other and see the tension that they start creating when you place them so close together. This image as well. So look, we've developed this in Lightroom so that they're very contrasty images. You'll notice that again, the hand goes up the braid, you follow her eyesight over to the other image. There's almost nothing in this area, making it very easy to leap over to the other image. Up in the upper right hand corner, we've got that same blue that we have down over here. You come back down, you want to read Airstream, you want to read the license plate, and then you scoot back over again, completing the circle. Similarly, in here, we've got two images very similar in contrast and tone, very desaturated. And what's holding these together in addition to that is the fact that he's got this very kind of beach-like necklace that you would see very typical on a surfer. And here we are at the ocean. So that connects those as well. And even if it didn't connect those, let's go back to that for a minute. Even if it didn't connect those, obviously, people are going to read in to the images, things like that. So even though you might not be planning that, you might want to take into consideration what people are wearing and how they're going to see the two images as they come together. Here, this is just basically patterns and textures coming down one side and up the other, leading your eye around. Nice contrast in colors, right? So we've got the blue on one side and the gold on the other. Here again, these two images I don't think would stand on their own, but, and this might be a stretch because I know they were both taken in the old penitentiary in Santa Fe, but here we've got this amazing line of sight looking right down over here to this little ball that obviously brings me back to days of playing kickball in the playground, and you wonder what it's doing in this dilapidated state. And so that, to me, the subject matter becomes a mystery, and that holds these two images together. Here it's the repeating patterns. We've got the cracking of the window and also the inability to see out of this window. And although we can see out of this window, you really can't get out of this window. So both of these are holding some tension between them in that you can't get past there, either physically or visually. And I love the way that this, of course, repeats the pattern up here, the shadow, and then we've got the kind of repeating pattern, repeating color palette in both images. These are details. I'm not sure they actually work really well together. I'd like to see them switched, because this leading line, I'd actually like to see it going up, you know, so that we could flip-flop them, because then it seems like this would come back down around. So a lot of times you might put your images up, you might want to live with them for a day or two, and then kind of think, you know, what should they be switched maybe? But I do like they're both black and white. They both have about the same amount of contrast in them, both obviously from the same location and are detailed shots of the same subject matter. This is a personal project I've been working on with an infrared camera, going out and shooting motion from cars or trains. I will just warn you, if you do this, you need to get another driver. I don't want to hear about any of you driving and taking pictures out of the car at the same time. But because they're shot with this infrared camera, because they contain the motion blur, they just fit together so well. They're big and blocky, and now, because I've got three, I have to think of something else too. I have to think of balance. So this image is centered to the left or weighted to the left. This image is weighted to the right, so I'm going to put them on the left or right side. The one that's centered in the middle is going to be a nice balance there. So not only do you have to think of reasons that the images go together, but then you also really need to look, once you've gotten more than two, how those images are sequenced and how it balances. Here again is some more motion. Here's a nice leading line, I think, where the two horizons meet. So these images were actually cropped so that they would meet in the middle like this. Again, the same subject matter, same kind of motion coming down one side. This cross, these crosses here by the side of the road, that same shape mimicked over here. This obviously is going to bring us around in the circle, this blur, and then come up the power line and then bring us back over with those lines there. Again, same kind of subdued colors. And you'll notice that the skies are the same. They've got kind of that same bluish tint, so it's a little bit colder. I didn't want to warm these up. I wanted to give it that cold feeling. And they're about the same tonality so that you don't have this jarring difference between the two. Okay, again, another one on balance now that we've got three images. This one in the middle, similar in subject matter, similar in tone, but a little bit lighter, but that's okay because the two larger objects on the side are balancing that. Here, same idea. We've got a very different subject in the middle, but two very similar subjects on either side in order to balance that, all having to do with reflections. In this case, we've got a primary subject, and these are much more abstract on either side. Finally, we've got a whole sequence of images here based on a theme. This theme would be water, so some of them are reflections, some of them are motion, some of them are, you know, have to do with a theme of water but aren't necessarily water but imply it with the umbrella. So again, you can make a sequence of you know, however many images you want. Just make sure that there's some kind of similarity. Here I've toned them all down. They've got very, very little saturation, very little color in all of them. But I think that helps to allow them to work together as a single unit. Here the color is, also the theme is, right? We've got two images of churches, not necessarily the same religions, but something's holding them together. I love the wires here kind of creating the bridge between them, and also you're looking up at the heavens. So again, people are going to start reading into the images you put together. So I like to have a very, you know, kind of obvious reason that these are together. Again, color palette, they're all photographed in a museum, but behind the displays. So the displays are lit on the other side, and these are all the shadows that I'm taking the images of. Again, held together by color, held together by the subject matter and kind of the mystery of each one, because you're not quite sure which one it is. And here also the amount of detail. You can tell there's about the same amount of detail in each one, and they're interesting shapes. They're similar objects with kind of equal spacing. None of them are super crowded, but they all kind of seem to work within the space that they have. Two still life images, same color palette, simple objects go together. Here, love the fact that one side is dark, the other side is light, so we've got this balance going on between dark and light. Interesting subject matter, same subject repeated in both of them. Here we happen to have sugar, and we happen to have the same teeth in both images. Here are the trees. So here the simple subject of trees is going to be carried between two images. Here we've got kind of night images, a little bit spooky, not sure what's going on. So that kind of mystery between the two images is evident. Now this image I love, or these images I love, this is where I really think where I've taken 3 images and we've connected them together with the use of this leading line that actually makes these a single image. So to me that's fascinating, especially in a minute I'm going to show you the source files for this, and this is what we're actually going to do in the next part of this sequence is we're going to create this triptych, and we're also going to create these series of horses, because these did not start off looking similar. Some were shot in higher contrast, some were lower contrast, some were in color. All of that was distracting. So in the next part of this series, we're going to take a look at how to take images that might look dissimilar and actually put them together through the use of color and tone and cropping to make a cohesive body of work. My name is Julianne Cost. Thanks for joining me on this episode of The Complete Picture.